With Galdino, also known as Mr. 3, making his live action debut in season 2 of the One Piece live action adaptation coming out in March, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention how weirdly important Mr. 3 is in the Devil Fruit canon of One Piece, because this is theoretical. However, I do think, based on the research I've done on the subject previously, I do believe that Galdino is the first special Paramecia fruit user in the franchise. He then lays the groundwork using the powers of the Wax fruit for all other special Paramecia fruit characters that come after him. Now, the term special Paramecia is canonical, as it is spoken in the time skip, specifically in chapter 863 during the events of Whole Cake Island. Now, you may be asking, why is a special Paramecia different from a normal Paramecia fruit user? Well, we don't have a canonical explanation as to why they are different just yet. However, I think I have an answer based on what we have seen so far. Based on what we have seen so far, a Paramecia fruit user is just given an ability. So think of characters like Buggy, or let's say Mr. 1, okay? They don't necessarily produce anything. The power is just a random power. However, with characters like Galdino, they are able to produce a substance. Said substance has special properties onto itself. They have nothing to do with the user. These properties exist as soon as the substance is generated. The substance in question, depending on the user, can be generated seemingly effortlessly and limitlessly with no stamina stipulations. We have seen this throughout the series with various characters. However, lastly, the character themselves, meaning the body of the character, has some sort of special ability that correlates with the substance being generated. It could be one or several, but there's something going on with the user's body that correlates with the substance being produced. So, with that being said, Galdino can produce wax, being the user of the wax fruit, limitlessly and effortlessly. However, said wax is not normal wax per se. The wax does melt like normal wax, so it is susceptible to heat. However, the special property of the wax is that it is as hard as steel when it solidifies. So that's why it's special and not just normal wax. This is brought up during the events of the Little Garden arc. However, with that being said too, Galdino, or Mr. 3 himself, does have some special properties that we see throughout the series, because when he's using his abilities, the 3 atop his head, which is his hair styled in the shape of a 3, does light on fire as if it were a candle wick, because he is technically a candle man, being the user of the wax fruit. So that's a special ability there. And we also see during the events of Impel Down that his body is susceptible to heat as well. So much like the wax, he too does not like hot conditions, which is very interesting. Now in the anime, it does appear as though that he is sweating wax, even though he himself is not made of wax. So these are special properties that his body has. But with that being said, the usage of his abilities during the Little Garden arc do permeate throughout the series with other characters with similar abilities, because the 2 things that he does are seen through other characters. Because 1, he makes constructs out of his wax. They have been objects and they have been clones of himself. And 2, he does make a suit of armor out of wax called Candle Champion. These 2 abilities are seen throughout other characters in the franchise who I believe have similar abilities to him. Now, spoilers for the time skip and later parts of the pre-time skip. However, One popular character that I do believe is a special paramecia is Don Quixote Doflamingo, who uses the string fruit, because like Galdino, he is able to produce string effortlessly and limitlessly. 2. The special ability that his body has in being the user of this fruit is that he seemingly can generate strings within his own body. You may think this is mundane, however, unless it is a specific ability of the person, no other devil fruit user whom is a paramecia fruit user, or otherwise for that matter, does something similar to this. No one can actually generate constructs of their fruit within their body. This is completely unique to Don Quixote Doflamingo. Now, the special property of the string that Doflamingo produces is that when it touches a person, it can hijack their body, and Doflamingo can control them like a puppet. That's the special property of the string itself. However, Doflamingo has very similar abilities to Galdino because he too makes constructs, and he too technically makes a suit of armor. However, in this case, the suit of armor, which is a technique called Black Knight, is just a copy of him. So it's a clone of him, like what Galdino does, but it fights for him. The reason why I call it armor is because it acts like a hollow suit of armor that fights on Doflamingo's behalf, and it's literally called Black Knight, like a knight wearing armor. That's why I think the intention was behind naming the attack that. So in that way, both Galdino and Doflamingo are very similar. However, let's bring things back to the character who was designated as a special paramecia in the first place, Charlotte Katakuri of the Big Mom Pirates, and spoilers for Whole Cake Island in the time skip. However, we find out that he has the power of the Mochi Mochi fruit. I do find it funny that the Wax fruit, the string fruit, and the Mochi Mochi fruit are all white. I just think that's interesting. But the point is that people have said that he turns into Mochi during his various fights with Luffy, and that's not true. What I think is happening, and we've seen this many a time before, but I think he has a armor that looks like his body, completely made of Mochi. And then in combination with his haki, he's able to dodge out of the way of attacks. But in that being said, I think the properties of the Mochi are twofold, because not only is the Mochi super sticky, but it could have some special properties to it. The reason why I say this is because during the fight with Luffy, he pulls out a giant trident from his forearm called Mogura. We know that he's not using his awakened abilities in order to turn the trident into Mochi and then transform it back into steel or what have you when he pulls it out, because no transformation like that occurs. We do know, however, that oddly, both Katakuri and Doflamingo do have the awakened ability to turn their surroundings into Mochi and string, respectively. However, this does not occur when Katakuri pulls out the trident. That is why I think when he's dodging attacks and his body is bobbing and weaving around damage, it's actually him moving his real body around within a Mochi duplicate of his body, meaning he's wearing a suit of armor that just looks like himself, made out of this weird Mochi, and he's moving his body out of the way of attacks while using his observation haki. The reason why this is so on point when bringing up Doflamingo as well is because we've seen a technique like this be done before in the events of the Dressrosa arc, because a guy under Doflamingo called Treble is very similar to Katakuri in this way, because in using the sticky fruit, he is very much like Katakuri, as the mucus produced is very sticky. It's also flammable, but in using the mucus, he has made a body bigger than his original body that then tricks people into thinking that he's bigger than he actually is. Therefore, when they go to attack him, he puts on the facade of being kind of like a Logia, in which the attack will just go right through the armor that is his mucus generated body, and the opponent thinks that they have attacked him, but they've missed him completely because his actual body is very thin, hiding within the mucus-generated armor. So, much like Treble, Katakuri is doing the same thing most likely, but a more advanced version, as the armor generated looks like him, is the same size as him, but has an infinite amount of space, presumably, and he's just bobbing and weaving his real body around in this Mochi body to evade attacks. But with that being said, all this has been set off presumably by the wax fruit held by Galdino, of which we see in the Little Garden arc while he's under the alias of Mr. 3, because the wax fruit is capable of doing all these things even in a very rudimentary way. It does make constructs. Galdino does make copies of himself, and he does give himself a suit of armor. So, with that being said, yes, it's very possible that Galdino was the first special paramecia in the series. So, to finish us off, if you are liking the video, hit the like button. If you are enjoying the content and want to see more from me, hit the sub button, and don't forget to ring that bell. But if you could, please hit the hype button as well, because it does help somehow. Now, with that being said too, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Wax.